Welcome to Democracy in Action, insights and discussion about some of the most talked about topics of the previous month with the Fulcrum's collaborators. Consistent with the Fulcrum's mission, this program strives to share many perspectives to widen our audience's viewpoints. I'm Hugo Balta, Executive Editor of the Fulcrum and your host. Today we're joined by Beau Breslin, the Joseph C. Palamountain Jr. Chair in Government at Skidmore College. Vanessa Castro, a Public Voices Fellow of the OpEd Project, the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, and the Every Page Foundation. And Reverend Wesley Bridges, the CEO of Clergy for Prison Reform. Beau, I'd like to begin the conversation with you. Last month, you introduced us to a new series called Following Jefferson, Promoting Intergenerational Understanding Through Constitution Making. Tell us more about this project and what we can expect.
Sure, Hugo. Thanks for having me on the program, and I'm thrilled to be on with my fellow guests. This is a great opportunity, and I'm delighted. So, I'm interested in constitutional reform. That's what I work on in my academic life, and I've written widely on Jefferson. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, Hugo, the story begins with Jefferson, right? So Thomas Jefferson thought that constitutions should be rewritten every generation. And he got in this long debate. The story is he got in this long debate with Madison about constitutional reform. Madison believed that a constitution ought to endure over hundreds of years, many generations, in order to build up the credibility it needed. And Jefferson said, no, that's not the way it should work. Every generation, which for him meant in every 19 years, we ought to metaphorically go back to Philadelphia and rewrite the Constitution. And the reason why he thought that, Hugo, was because it was just another form of tyranny for him, right? That if you are governed by a constitution written, in his words, by a bunch of white dead men, that constitutes another form of tyranny. So I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I've written about the idea of these periodic constitutions. But it occurred to me that's sort of a one-dimensional approach to what we can think about in terms of generational constitutions. Jefferson imagined that it would always be sort of old folks, the wise elders of a polity, who would write the constitutions. And I thought, okay, that's just one way of thinking about it. There is another way to think about generational constitutions, and that's literally to ask the various people from the different generations to tell us what would be in their constitution. And so what I did with a student, a woman named Prairie Gunnels, first-year student at Skidmore, is we used ChatGPT, we used AI to generate constitutions that reflect the priorities, beliefs, ideas of each living generation. And there's 7 living generations. And this is what they came up with. The documents are long. They're 40-page constitutions. From the greatest generation, the silent generation, the baby boomer generation, Generation X, millennials, Generation Z, and the most recent, the alpha generation. And the constitutions are very different, right? You can't see them because I'm blurred, but the constitutions are very different. And so in conversation with Hugo at the Fulcrum and conversations with the folks at the Fulcrum, I imagine that we could put together a series that tells the story of the different priorities that are reflected in AI-generated constitutions. And so we decided we put together a 5-part series that each month will take a different part of our Constitution, starting with the preamble in June, institutions in July, rights in August, amendments in September, and ratification in October. And I'll tell the story in 750 words or so of how the different generations see each parts of the Constitution, how their priorities are reflected. And what you're going to see is it's very different. So take the preamble as an example. The preamble for the greatest generation is dramatically different, right? It's about the idea of that preamble is about a more perfect union that's made up of a work ethic that's of a particular type and so on. Whereas the alpha generation is more about sort of technological literacy and environmental justice and things like that. So what I'm going to do in the hope, I'll finish here, Hugo, in the hope that we can talk across generational differences about constitutional ideas and priorities. I'm going to do the series of these 5 essays. Prairie and I are going to do them, these 5 essays over the course of the next 5 months, in the hope that maybe different generations can get a glimpse of what it means to think differently about constitutional reform.
A very interesting project, and the concept of the Constitution being a living document. And as our founding father suggested, reflecting the people and the times of that moment. Um, we live in very polarizing times. How does the Constitution um, mend for a country that sees itself so very differently?
Yeah, so I think that I mean that's the million-dollar question, Hugo. And I think actually our Constitution, I'll preface this by saying I've been a Madisonian my whole life. I think enduring constitutions make a difference, but I'm not at the moment. And I actually think our Constitution, not all of it, but most of it is out of date. It's a little anachronistic. It does not reflect the current 21st century America that we've come to understand. And this is the first time I'm 59 years old. This is the first time in my life that I've thought, yeah, this Constitution doesn't work anymore. So whether you're thinking about sort of the traditional ones, the traditional parts of the Constitution that seem not to work anymore, the Electoral College, right? Especially given the popular vote is often different than the Electoral College, or the dramatically undemocratic Senate, right? Where California has 80 times the population of Wyoming, and they both have equal representation in the Senate, or the lifetime tenure of Supreme Court or federal court judges. These things don't work. And then if you anymore, and then if you take the idea of rights, which I think is the real sort of cultural currency, right? The Bill of Rights doesn't fully reflect the way in which I think most Americans think about rights these days. On the left, you've got environmental rights, and maybe there's room for universal basic income. On the right, I think there would be different rights that would be prioritized. I think the idea of solidifying the Second Amendment and thinking about the ways in which the Second Amendment doesn't fully work for those on the right would be part of it. Now, the question, Hugo, is how do you bring these sides together in a constitutional reform moment? That's tricky, right? Are we going to have a constitutional convention anytime soon? No, but my hope is in at least slicing this up in generational ways, we can think differently about understanding the polarization of American society at the moment.
Yeah, great. I'm really looking forward to the series. I'd like to continue the conversation now with you, Vanessa. Um, in the column, Eliminating HIV Prevention is a Public Health Crisis, you wrote that the Trump administration is planning to eliminate the CDC's Division of HIV Prevention and what the collapse of HIV prevention will mean to thousands of people in the US who will acquire HIV in the next 5 years. Tell us more about your column.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Hugo, for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. I'm really grateful to be here with all of you. I think it's really just kind of putting into context that HIV isn't an isolated issue. It's something that impacts all of us. We have 1.2 million people in the US living with HIV currently, and with the elimination of the HIV prevention division, we're going to see just the ramifications in a variety of areas. We've kind of started seeing some kind of systematic dismantling that's been happening that has made folks kind of concerned, right, what the future implications might be. some of them being the elimination of the sexually transmitted infections lab. We have been seeing a rise in other sexually transmitted infections like chlamydia, syphilis, things of that nature. And so what we've noticed is that when there's a rise in some of these other infections, we see a rise in HIV. And unfortunately, given the impact of HIV, it's currently still an epidemic. And the communities that are most disproportionately impacted are Black and Latina LGBTQ plus communities. And we're starting to also see that within cisgender women. So I think it's really just talking about the importance of ensuring that we have these mechanisms in place. With the elimination of surveillance, we won't know what needs to happen in terms of preparation, right, for the next outbreak. And without any type of capacity building, how are folks going to be able to get testing, for example? That's something that a program is kind of being sunset now as we speak. The ability for folks to take their own HIV self-tests to ensure that they know their status and they make those informed decisions to know what their path is going to be within their sexual health and wellness. And unfortunately, just kind of given the information that was released within the fiscal 2026 Health and Human Services budget, it seems like HIV prevention is not going to be a priority. And so now I think it's important. I think with what I've been trying to say is the importance of knowing that we've been in this moment before. We need to kind of organize and ensure that we have the mechanisms in place to support so many of these organizations that are doing this critical work, because it's going to be really falling on them without any type of support, excuse me, at the federal level, to ensure that these programs continue, right? That there is testing, there is information, right? We have a wealth of knowledge. We have decades of progress and, you know, advancements within this space that have allowed us to inform other areas. And so without this division in place and without those kind of that critical infrastructure, we're going to see just a rise in a lot of different areas. And I think the concern is, what is this going to mean for our communities that are already on the front lines, right? And, you know, what resources might they have to be able to continue to meet the needs of those that are most disproportionately impacted? And what are the things that we need to start thinking about in terms of innovation and collaboration, and to ensure that should there not be any more funding for HIV prevention, that we actually have systems in place, right, and collaborators in place that are going to allow us to continue this work, to ensure that we don't reach a critical moment in which we feel like our hands are tied in terms of what our options are to be able to reach the goal of ending HIV within 2030.
You've already mentioned a lot of what work that's being done independent of the federal government, a lot of organizations that work in the HIV space. And as we've seen with not only health, but the other social determinants of health, education, the economy, community environment, in regards to solving for the problem that's being created by the elimination of agencies like the one you mentioned with the CDC, what's the responsibility of state and local governments to fill in those gaps and to work with many of those organizations that you've mentioned we need to support?
That's a big question. I think it's really, you know, every state is different, right, in terms of what their priorities are. And I'll kind of give a little bit of, I'll step back a moment and kind of give a little context to a situation that happened last year, actually, where Tennessee did not accept any federal funding for HIV. And so folks are scrambling, right, because they're relying on that money within their budgets to be able to support their existing programs. You know, folks really came together and there was an uproar, right, within community in terms of understanding, you know, what can we do moving forward? And, you know, there was kind of an opportunity for an organization to kind of be the placeholder, right, and ensure that funding continued. But it's a scary thought to think about, you know, what if some states have more of that capability than others and that capacity building? And unfortunately, within the HIV space, it's just not been, you know, public health in general, right? It's been critically underfunded. Now we see kind of a very lean workforce. And so that responsibility is going to be huge, I think, for states and local organizations, and finding other funding streams, right, to be able to support some of these programs, and then also the information piece. I think the education piece is just as equally, if not more so important than the actual kind of physical piece of being able to support a lot of these programs. So I did also mention the fact that folks are really burnt out, right? Within this kind of revolving door um, kind of landscape that we're in terms of understanding where public health falls and what's prioritized between, the administration and community. So I think at the state and local level, it's really going to be about, our advocates really coming together, talking to folks who are able to make those decisions within policy, and honestly having an emergency preparedness plan, right? Like, what are we going to do in order to ensure that our response is still appropriate, that we're still meeting the needs of community, and what are the areas in which we need to collaborate perhaps with other states and see kind of the importance of replicating successful programming, right? So I think it's really going to fall a lot on our states and our local organizations to really organize. And I think it's so important that we continue to hold space for conversations to happen at various levels, because there are folks who are doing amazing work with little resources, and there are lessons that we can learn from them and apply them into other areas. But I guess it's a little bit of a complicated answer because it just depends on the state, right? And there's this other layer of stigma discrimination in some regions. And so I think it's a matter of deciding, together as a collective, what are we going to do and how might we ensure that we have this kind of plan in place, right, to respond to some of the more significant gaps in areas like the South, where there's 53% new HIV diagnoses, is a region that's heavily impacted compared to, for example, the New York or some other states that might have different resources to be able to support the HIV prevention.
Now turning to Reverend Bridges, in your article, Democracy on the Edge, Take Action Now to Maintain the Constitution, you wrote democracy is in danger. Voter suppression efforts are once again on the rise, most recently in the reintroduction of the SAVE Act. The bill calls for the elimination of the use of driver's licenses and state IDs and requires birth certificates instead. This has been brought up, as you mentioned in your article, time and time again. Tell us about the sense of urgency that we're experiencing now, and tell us a little bit more of what you wrote in your column.
Absolutely, Hugo. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I echo the sentiments of my other panelists. I'm glad to be here and hear your purposeful, passionate pieces. So thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, so democracy is yet again under attack. It's nothing new. It was actually attacked in 2020. It was overlooked, and we understand that pardons have been given because there's no accountability when it comes to seeking absolute power. And that's what this bill is about. That's what this movement is about. The SAVE Act is another effort just simply to disenfranchise more voters, in particular Black and Brown people, from going to the polls. So they styled it as, we want to be want our polling process, want our voting process to have integrity, but it's just more countermeasures to disenfranchise more people. So they go to the birth certificate piece. So it's about power. Nothing moves narcissistic behavior more than power and attention. So I was very interested in Beau's piece about the Constitution kind of being outdated. And then he answered my question about, well, hypothetically, who would we get to oversee the redoing of this? Because the people that are at the helm right now have already been trimming pieces of the Constitution off that they don't particularly like. So that's why democracy is being threatened right now. It's not hyperbole. President Trump spoke about this in 2020. He spoke about it in 2022. He spoke about even seeking a third term here in 2025. So now we're 5 months into his next presidency, and maybe it has talks have feigned a little bit. They have failed a little bit, but they'll come back up again because attention is now on him restoring his integrity when it comes to aligning himself with a real enemy in President Putin. So now that has taken a back seat, but it'll be back again because power and fealty doesn't sleep. So it's not about political party. It's not about affiliation. It's about fealty to one person. And so that's what the piece was about. The SAVE Act is definitely a bill. It's passed. At the time of the piece was published, it had passed the House, so it has not passed the Senate as of our recording time today. And so people are taking action. They're calling senators and things of that nature to vote against this bill, or I don't know the process, or to let it die in the Senate, or they do have to do something to take action. But right now they're taking up the big beautiful bill. So again, those things have to take a back seat, but we cannot fall asleep because they'll be back, and we have to let not only DC know, we have to let even here locally. We're having a election campaign, mayoral campaign today, and voters have been purged. They use the system of, if your name is not on your utility bill, if you don't have a water bill, then you can't vote in the municipal election because you don't have a water bill. But here in the small town of Mississippi, we still have people living on government housing. We still have people living in apartments that their water bill is inclusive in their monthly rent. So they never see a water bill. So how can you rightfully purge me from a role because you don't see my name on a water bill? So I've been told that some of those names were added back last night. The current mayor didn't like it, but those laws were upheld. So it's all type of voter disenfranchisement going on locally. It's going on the state level. It's going on the federal level, state level, nationwide, and we just have to remain awake and say that we're for democracy. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. Let's get back to the days where there was decency. When you won the election, you won it. When you lost it, you lost it. And there was always a peaceful transfer of power. We haven't seen that in the last 4 or 5 years. And if we don't speak up and just wait every 4 years to say something, we might lose democracy altogether.
There's so much that you've shared in regards to staying awake, keeping awake. We've seen so much, again, as I've mentioned, coming out of Washington. A lot of it is distraction, right? It's sort of like, take a look at this while other things are being done. And a lot of the look at this shiny thing is the media. Can you share a little bit from your perspective the role that media plays in keeping people awake, but also keeping government in check?
That is a great question about media. In 2025, 2024, recently, I didn't know when I wanted coverage, when I wanted information, I didn't know what news station to put it on. I didn't know whether to put it on MSNBC, CNN, Fox. I didn't know, and I found myself going more to individual journalists with that were reputable, and that were just speaking facts, speaking data, things that really make America go around, not just hyperbole, not just ideology, but actually facts and data. So I found myself drifting toward independent journalism. And I know we live in a time now where everybody has a podcast, everybody has a platform to speak, and it's a good thing because they're not locked into, for lack of a better term, what CNN is locked into, or any of the other big affiliations, or I know some newscasters that got removed for some of their political views, and they went on to start their own platforms, and I check in on them from time to time. But I honestly don't know how or where we get the right information if media is pushed or they're afraid because of the administration that's in now, or the administration that left out. Because we're seeing press conferences now where certain journalists don't get questions, or then when they get questions, they get ridiculed, ostracized, or even embarrassed for the question that they ask. So I guess the short answer is keep showing up to work. I mean, I show up every day whether I'm feeling good or feeling bad about what's going to happen, what has happened. We have to keep showing up, And I don't want to get preachy right here. This is not church, but the Bible says you don't have to fight in every battle, but you do need to show up. So we have to show up and be present. And again, stay awake. I know that word is not liked in certain places and spaces, but we really have to stay awake and stay vigilant and visual and use our voices all at the same time.
All three of you are showing up, and showing up is half the battle. This has been time well spent. Reverend Wesley, Vanessa, Beau, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. And thank you for sharing those insights with our audience at the Fulcrum. I'm looking forward to continuing to collaborate with you and publish your writings. This has been Democracy in Action. I'm Hugo Balta. Hasta la próxima.